Have you ever wondered what the deadliest mountain in the world looks like? If someone asked you that question, you would probably picture something massive and intimidating, like Mount Everest or K2, towering peaks that have claimed hundreds of lives and look every bit as dangerous as they are. And if you were asked about the deadliest mountain in the United States, you might think of Denali in Alaska, Mount Rainier in Washington, or Mount Hood in Oregon, all of which have fearsome reputations and equally fearsome appearances. But what if I told you that the deadliest mountain in America, and indeed the deadliest mountain anywhere in the world when you adjust for its size, is actually a much smaller, unassuming peak in New Hampshire that you have probably never heard of if you are not from the Northeast, a mountain that you can literally drive a car or take a train to the top of, yet one that has claimed more than 160 lives since 1848, and continues to catch experienced hikers and casual tourists alike off guard with its absolutely brutal conditions. My name is Emma Chamberlain, and today on Infographics, we are going to explore Mount Washington, a mountain that defies every expectation. We are going to look at why this relatively modest peak is so deadly, how its weather compares to some of the most extreme environments on Earth, and why its unassuming appearance makes it far more dangerous than mountains twice its height. This is a story about geography, about weather, about human psychology, and about how a mountain that looks like a gentle giant can turn into a killing machine in minutes. Let us start with the basic facts. Mount Washington has a total elevation of 6,288 feet above sea level. It is the tallest summit in New England and in the entire northeastern region of the United States. But when you compare it to mountains out west, it looks like a dwarf. Despite being the tallest in the Northeast, it is only the 550th tallest mountain nationwide. There are literally hundreds of mountains taller than it across the Rockies, the Sierra Nevada, and the Cascades. It is less than half the height of dozens of mountains in Colorado and Alaska. And yet, since 1948, more than 32 people have died on Mount Washington from falls, avalanches, and hypothermia. That ties it with Grand Teton in Wyoming for the fourth highest number of deaths on any mountain in the country, behind only Denali, Mount Rainier, and Mount Hood. But Mount Washington is less than a third the height of Denali and roughly half the height of Rainier, Hood, and Grand Teton. When you go back further, since modern record-keeping began in 1848, more than 160 people are known to have lost their lives on Mount Washington. Adjusted for the number of deaths per foot of vertical climb, Mount Washington becomes not only the deadliest mountain in America, but the deadliest mountain anywhere in the world. This is a fact that becomes all the more strange when you realize that, unlike those other deadly mountains, where the only way up is to climb, you can simply drive a car or take a train all the way to the summit of Mount Washington. That accessibility is precisely what makes it so deadly. Denali is in an extremely remote location in rural Alaska, not connected to any roads. You have to charter a plane just to fly to its base camp, and climbing from there takes weeks through massive glaciers and crevasse fields that are apparent from miles away. Mount Rainier is similarly covered in glaciers, with cavernous crevasses large enough to swallow houses, all visible from far away. The kind of people who decide to climb these mountains are usually well aware of how dangerous they are, and have spent serious time preparing. Mount Washington, on the other hand, does not look all that different from just about any other mountain in New Hampshire's White Mountains. There are no glaciers to frighten people away. It is hardly in a remote location, only about a 3.5-hour drive from Boston. And from the parking lot at the base, it can take only about 2 hours for an unprepared hiker to get in way over their head. The summit of Mount Washington is actually the 6th most visited mountain summit in the world, largely because of its accessibility from major metropolitan areas, the fact that you can drive or take a train to the top, and its status as the highest peak in New England. But all the other mountain summits in the top most visited are either much shorter and therefore safer, or much higher, and therefore people know to prepare better. Mount Washington sits at a weird middle height, where underprepared climbers, or even drivers expecting something easier, can get caught off guard when luck does not favor them. But it is not really Mount Washington's height that makes it so deadly. It is a fact that this mountain is arguably the site of the worst weather anywhere on planet Earth. Let us start with wind. On an afternoon in April 1934, researchers at the Mount Washington Observatory measured a wind speed that should have been impossible, an astonishing 231 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, a Category 5 hurricane only needs to reach 157 miles per hour. 231 miles per hour is enough to obliterate any wood-framed house, and will cause serious structural issues even to well-built buildings. For decades, that measurement was the fastest wind speed ever measured anywhere on Earth's surface, until it was surpassed in 1996 by a tropical cyclone off the western coast of Australia that clocked in at 254 miles per hour. It is still the fastest wind speed ever measured on Earth's surface outside of a tropical cyclone or tornado. Hurricane-force winds, meaning winds greater than 75 miles per hour, are observed on the summit of Mount Washington for an average of 110 days a year, nearly 1 out of every 3 days. During winter, wind speeds are at or above hurricane force about every other day on average. This is the most consistently dangerously fast wind experienced anywhere in the world. These wicked fast winds happen for an interesting combination of reasons. Mount Washington, while not tall compared to western peaks, is still a giant in the east. Its summit is the highest geographic point for nearly 1,000 miles in every direction. It happens to exist at almost exactly the midpoint between the North Pole and the equator, and it sits precisely at the intersection of 3 major weather systems, from the Atlantic to its south, from the Arctic to its north and west, and from the Gulf of Mexico to its far southwest. These 3 clashing weather systems bring warm, humid tropical air from the southwest, moist maritime air from the Atlantic, and cool, drier continental air from the north, all converging precisely at the summit. They clash and generate powerful low-pressure systems and strong pressure gradients, driving the freak storms and extreme winds. Wind is usually slowed down by friction from the ground, but since Mount Washington is by far the highest point anywhere around for thousands of miles, the higher winds that strike it have never been slowed down by this process. The Presidential Range, which Mount Washington crowns, forms a V shape pointing directly at the cold winds blowing across southern Canada. As the higher winds reach the range, they are suddenly forced upward and accelerate through a process known as the Venturi effect, similar to how a river's velocity increases as it passes over rapids. This combination of clashing air masses and acceleration is what creates some of the most freakish weather on the planet. Now let us talk about cold. As you would expect for a mountain at its elevation and latitude, it gets pretty cold up on the summit. The all-time low recorded temperature was 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, back in January 1885. High temperatures of 0 degrees Fahrenheit still occur about 13 days a year, while low temperatures at or below 0 usually happen every single day, between mid-November and early April. Between December and March, the temperature on the summit will only get above freezing for an average of just 15 days. Across the whole year, the average ambient temperature on the summit is just 27 degrees Fahrenheit. But those ambient temperatures do not account for the crazy fast wind speeds and the absolutely bone-shattering wind chill effect they produce. To give you an idea of how extreme this can get, consider what the mountain experienced on January 16, 2004. That day, the ambient temperature was 46.3 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, already very cold. But it was also sustaining wind speeds of just over 87 miles per hour. As a result, the wind chill value was a brutal 102.6 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, enough to cause frostbite to exposed human tissue in under 5 minutes, and be lethal in as little as 30 minutes without proper Arctic survival gear. That brutal record was beaten recently over the night of February 3rd through 4th, 2023, when an ambient temperature of 47 degrees below zero and faster wind speeds of more than 100 miles per hour produced a new record low U.S. wind chill temperature of 108 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. Simply put, that is nearly as cold as the coldest surface air temperature ever recorded in history, which was measured at 128.6 degrees below zero Fahrenheit in 1983 at the Vostok Station deep within Antarctica. The summit of Mount Washington can literally get as cold as the depths of Antarctica during winter. During that 2004 event, when the wind chill plunged to 102.6 below zero, it never once rose to be warmer than 50 degrees below zero for more than 71 hours, nearly 3 straight days. Even during summer, temperatures can unexpectedly plunge, and winter-like conditions can exist at the summit. This is the next big, dangerous problem on the mountain. Due to its location along clashing weather patterns, its relative proximity to the Great Lakes, bringing lake-effect snow, and its relatively high elevation compared to its surroundings, Mount Washington gets a ton of snow, which is extremely unusual for its modest elevation. The summit sees an average of almost 97 inches of precipitation per year, the vast majority falling as snow. That is surprisingly even more precipitation than the summit of Mount Rainier receives, despite Rainier being about twice as tall. Mount Washington receives by far the most snow of any mountain of its height or lower anywhere in the United States. For basically the same reasons, it is so windy, huge volumes of snow get picked up along the lower Presidential Mountains and blown up across Mount Washington to its eastern side, where the snow packs and fills deep ravines like Tuckerman Ravine, sometimes reaching up to 50 feet deep during winter. In winter and spring, this thickly packed snow, especially in Tuckerman Ravine, can morph into an almost concrete-like layer that easily fractures and generates avalanches, a major hazard for hikers and backcountry skiers throughout the winter and spring. Many might not expect such a high avalanche risk on a relatively small mountain. As recently as 2024, backcountry skiers lost their lives in Tuckerman Ravine by falling hundreds of feet. In 2012, a man slipped and slid down the side of Tuckerman Ravine in April and fell into a hidden crevasse. His body was not recovered for 7 weeks. Others have gone missing on the mountain for years until their remains were discovered, sometimes buried beneath dozens of feet of snow during catastrophic avalanche events, while others simply wandered too far from the road or railroad that takes you safely to the summit and got trapped alone when the weather suddenly turned. Near the summit, it can literally go from relatively nice to blizzard-like and life-threatening within minutes. Temperatures can plunge by upwards of 20 degrees just as quickly, and they are very difficult to predict. If all those hazards were not enough, there is also the concern of very, very limited visibility. With all the wind, storms, and precipitation, cloud cover up there is nearly constant. Only about 50 days out of the entire year on average are clear on the summit between sunrise and sunset. Visibility conditions can and do rapidly deteriorate within minutes, just like with temperature, including complete whiteouts with literally zero visibility, where you cannot see more than a foot or two ahead. These poor visibility conditions, when they happen suddenly and unexpectedly, are particularly dangerous for hikers or backcountry skiers near massive cliffs and drop-offs, like Tuckerman Ravine, which features plunges of up to 600 feet. If you get blinded during a total whiteout and become disoriented about your location, it is not inconceivable to see how you might take one wrong step into an abyss. There are many places in the world with worse conditions in a single category than Mount Washington, but very few combine all these factors together in such an overwhelmingly negative way. The Vostok Research Station in Antarctica might get colder, but it has nowhere near the same wind speeds, with a yearly average of just 11 miles per hour, and it receives virtually zero precipitation. Hurricane and tornado-prone areas may experience similar freak wind speeds, but they are nowhere near as frequent, and never in areas that get anywhere near as cold. Denali might have a much higher summit, lower oxygen, and similar visibility issues, but it gets virtually zero precipitation and does not get anywhere near as windy. For the most part, Mount Washington does not appear dangerous for most of the climb until you get beyond the tree line. The wicked fast winds contribute to a very unusual short tree line at only about 4,400 feet up. The climate any further up is simply too hostile to support any plant life more than a few inches tall. The climate changes radically as you climb. At the parking lot, you are in a humid continental climate typical for New England. As you move up, you quickly transition through a subarctic climate until you reach the tree line, where it immediately transitions into a tundra climate, not too dissimilar from Labrador or Greenland, the rest of the way to the summit. This can catch hikers off guard who do not expect to go from a calm walk through the woods at lower elevations to a potentially lethal walk through tundra further up. The treeless upper reaches are fully exposed with zero cover to hide behind when the weather rapidly turns with infamous super fast winds, whiteouts, and plunging temperatures. A total of 65 acres of Mount Washington's peak is classified as tundra terrain, the most tundra present on any mountain east of the Rockies. The potentially life-threatening danger of being exposed beyond the tree line is not apparent to most people who climb the mountain. Only when you are far removed from both the tree line and the summit, about halfway up, might you realize how deep into this danger zone you have gotten. While the tree line ends at 4,400 feet, it only takes about 3 miles of hiking from the parking lot to reach it, significantly less hiking than it takes to reach the base camp on Mount Rainier. In other words, you can reach the most dangerous zone on Mount Washington before you even reach the base camp on Rainier, a recipe for disaster for hikers not as prepared as they would be for Rainier. Near where the tree line ends, the U.S. Forest Service has put up ominous signs, warning that the area ahead contains the worst weather in America, and that hikers have lost their lives to the elements out there, exposed, even during summer. There is also the fact that Mount Washington is actually a lot more of a climb than many might expect. While it is only the 550th tallest by elevation, its prominence is substantially more impressive. Prominence measures how much a mountain stands out relative to surrounding terrain, the vertical distance between a summit and the lowest point you must descend to before climbing a higher peak. For Mount Washington, you have to descend from its summit all the way down to 140 feet in elevation at the Champlain Canal, before journeying toward a higher peak, Potato Knob, all the way down in North Carolina. This means nearly all of Mount Washington's sea level elevation is pure prominence, since it rises from very low elevation. 6,148 feet of its height is prominence, giving it the 24th highest prominence of any mountain in the contiguous 48 states, greater than even some 14,000 footers out west, like Pikes Peak. This means that despite its overall elevation being only a fraction of most western mountains, actually hiking up Mount Washington involves a similar vertical height that hikers truly experience, something that inexperienced hikers who only look at elevation values might not anticipate. You might plan more seriously for a 14,000-foot mountain than a 6,000-foot mountain, without realizing the actual vertical climb on both will be comparable. So many factors on Mount Washington deceive people into underestimating its true hidden danger, only for them to end up trapped, unprepared, exposed to brutal freezing, blinding, windy weather, with nowhere to hide, either falling off a cliff or succumbing to hypothermia. Mount Washington's reputation among serious climbers is such that it is actually a preferred training ground for much higher peaks in the Himalayas, like Everest and K2. You can experience similar weather and climatic conditions on Mount Washington without the added threat of altitude sickness complicating things further. That is great when you are prepared, but not at all when you are not. There are many examples from history, more than 160 recorded deaths since 1848. There is an entire Wikipedia list dedicated to these victims if you want to go down the rabbit hole into their individual stories. Some of these deaths are famous, like that of Lizzie Bourne, a young woman who died of exposure in 1855, just a few hundred feet from the summit, or the 6 climbers who died in a single 1849 storm. Others are less known, but each represents a life cut short by a mountain that does not look like it should be capable of such things. Mount Washington is a mountain that does not look like a killer. It is accessible, it is modest in height, and it has roads and trains to the top. But beneath that friendly exterior lies some of the most extreme weather on Earth, conditions that can turn lethal in minutes, and a terrain that offers no shelter once you pass the tree line. It is a geographic glitch, a nightmare hiding in plain sight in New Hampshire. The mountain serves as a reminder that danger is not always obvious. Sometimes the most threatening things are those that appear harmless, that invite you in with their accessibility, and then spring their trap when you are least prepared. Mount Washington has been doing this for centuries, and it will continue to do so as long as people underestimate it. If you found value in this deep dive, if it made you think differently about mountains, about weather, about how things are not always what they seem, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Infographics, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because understanding the world around us, even the parts that look harmless but hide deadly secrets, helps us not just survive, but appreciate the raw power of nature. Mount Washington is a testament to that power, a reminder that nature does not care about our plans or our expectations. It simply is what it is, and it is up to us to respect it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.